Welcome to Transformations, interviewing people changing our world. I'm your host, Diane J. Shaver, and as you've noticed, everybody I interview is so different from the other, but what they have in common is a deep commitment. And I want you to remember, it's one person, one decision, one commitment. You've got a world changer. And today I have the pleasure of talking with another world changer named Kate Nevin. And she's the founder of Enough Pie in Charleston, South Carolina. After 9/11, Kate moved from New York to Charleston, and through a series of events, it wasn't all at once, she found and started Enough Pie. And it's a nonprofit devoted to changing the face of the Upper Peninsula. And like many cities where there's development going on, it's usually the people that are most vulnerable that are affected. And they need a champion. They need somebody to make sure that they also get a share in what's going on. And that's exactly what Kate did. But I want her to tell you about it because I'm not the one that did it. So please welcome Kate Nevin, founder of Enough Pie. Welcome to Transformations, Kate.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I love what you're doing and who you're interviewing. So grateful that you've included me.
Well, you had to be included. Look at what you did. So you came from New York to Charleston. How did you focus on the Upper Peninsula? How did you come to Enough Pie? I'm sure it was a series of events.
It was. You're exactly right. I grew up in the South, so I spent a couple of years working in Manhattan and then made my way back to Charleston. And really enjoyed the fact that when you leave Manhattan and go probably anywhere else, there's more free time in your day to get involved in meaningful ways. It wasn't the daily 12-hour grind that I had working in the financial industry in New York. So I quickly got really involved in the arts community in town. And my husband, the reason I ended up down here was that he is very interested in historic development and urban infill redevelopment. So those two things sort of collided, my passion for the arts and community art in particular, and then my husband, his fascination with developing a building that had been abandoned for about 25 years. And so when I was helping him sort of with some connections and ideas for this building, which is really a place to house local emerging businesses and entrepreneurs, art studios, nonprofits. It's in an area of town where the rent can be a little lower, and so it's really appealing for those upstart kind of groups. And the more time I was spending sort of cultivating this network at the building, the more I realized that this neighborhood was a pretty unique part of Charleston. It's not the Rainbow Row and the historic buildings that everyone sees in travel magazines and imagines of the city, but it's really the heart and soul of the city and what was once sort of the industrial underbelly, from shipyards way back when to auto dealers, to now it's a lot of sort of warehouses and what you see when you're driving through there is still this industrial feel, but kind of peel back the layer and there's some really long-standing neighborhoods and communities in this area, some really important housing developments, some really tightly knit neighborhood associations, others not quite as tightly knit. So when you have these parts of town, and I think anyone in a growing city can speak to this or town, gentrification has benefits and it also has it's a real detriment to communities if not managed properly. So you see this influx of business and activity due to lower, more affordable rates than in maybe the historic part of town. And then behind that, what developers and newcomers don't usually see are the embedded connections that already exist between communities that have been there for generations. So Enough Pie has really evolved to be that sort of connective tissue that can welcome the newcomers while also reminding everyone what it means to be a neighbor and how we can all participate and what we think is a more connected community. And that really happens, we believe, through creativity, through empowerment, through connections, through civic action. And that's really where the name came from. This idea that there really is enough pie for everyone in this town if we make a thoughtful and concerted effort to connect the dots and to give people a voice in sort of the process.
It's so powerful, and it's really what people need now. I like your mission statement. It's using creativity to connect and empower our community in Charleston's Upper Peninsula. So why the arts? I mean, why not just start a business, start a school? Why the arts?
Right. Well, it started really early on, and this is going back to 2011 and sort of that first footprint of that original building. And then I began to reach out to other local businesses, small local businesses that were in the area, some restaurants, pottery studio. There were a couple of small tech firms, some interesting people that were connected to the community through civic organizations. And everyone had really beautiful visions for what this part of town could feel like, could be like, that it was really something different than the downtown historic part of Charleston. It was something that was authentic and local based, that really felt like a place for locals. And so there were all of these incredible ideas coming from the community, but these were people that are already trying to manage small businesses. They work long days at the city, or, maybe they don't have the right resources or enough time to volunteer because they're working 3 jobs. So it quickly became apparent that what we needed was some sort of organization that could hold the space for facilitation of ideas. So really the reason behind Enough Pie was to just create a platform at a nonprofit status that could apply for grants, that could accept donations, where really the original mission was, let's help the people that are committed to this neighborhood implement the ideas that they think would make it an even better place to live. So it really started as a way to help fund these early conversations with neighborhood leaders and residents to be that change instead of having to wait. That's sort of loosely become called creative placemaking, where you really use lighter, cheaper, sort of faster ways to make these changes instead of going through the usual realms of, municipal support or corporate support. It was really ground level support. A lot of elbow grease for sure. So that was a lot to ask small businesses. So Enough Pie really tried to fill the void and say, okay, we're going to create the space where these ideas can live, and we're going to help facilitate and produce them so that they are executed with really a high quality artists, high quality commitment to the outcome, but also recognition that the really important aspect of all of this is the process of everyone coming together to create something. So we really lean into the process part of what it makes to build a good community.
And that's so critical. I mean, there's so many things in what you just said. It's like I don't know, pulling it apart. But one of the things that Charleston is known for is downtown, and bless them, but it's tourists now, and us every once in a while. But what you talked about is real community, real neighborhoods, and that doesn't happen very much anymore. So that's a critical piece. And the other piece that came up for me as you were talking is that lots of times experts come in from the outside and they say what should happen, and they have the statistics. It never works. And what you've done, which is brilliant, is that you've used the people who live there, who know it intimately, whose heart is there. And that makes all the difference.
Absolutely. Most communities don't need another do-gooder to come in from the outside, or some fancy urban designer to come in and say how to fix X, Y, and Z. I think most neighbors know exactly what the problems are and have some really creative ideas for how to address them. So it's really trying to create a place where these ideas can percolate and sort of come together. And then really take shape in a way that's it's more easy to execute, right? So really helping to produce those ideas to fruition. And, building a place that feels like everyone has some ownership in it, in a part of town that's predominantly, in terms of the residential piece, made up of renters. It's hard you don't have that equity, so to speak. So how do you build that equity in the community? And we felt that a lot of that has simply been to highlight those leaders, those organizations, those very special public spaces, from libraries to parks to community centers, to highlight those spaces with our work builds up this idea that there are a lot of very high performing assets in this community, that yes, there are things to be fixed. Yes, there are issues. There are major challenges. But you've got to do that work from the ground up. So that has been really important, especially as we've continued to evolve, is to reach as many people so that they are the change and we are sort of helping to facilitate that work happen. Because that's the only way it's actually going to be sustainable, I think, is when it comes from the inside.
Absolutely. And I've said this to many people I interview, although you're doing it in one small area, in one small town, in one small state compared to everything,
Right.
It's really a model for how we need to move forward. And we've lost touch with one another. We've become focused on statistics and power in the sense of the seat of power, instead of every person has power. Everyone has personal power, and you're helping them to access that. And that is a huge thing to do. So it's almost as if you're building a model that can be taken anywhere. So it's kind of bigger than the Upper Peninsula, although the Upper Peninsula is so important. So can you give us some specifics of what you're doing, or what some of the organizations are doing, so we can kind of key into that?
Sure. And to kind of piggyback on what you just said about creating a model and sharing that, that we focus our efforts in an area that's just 836 acres, because we want to go very deep, but we want to be able to try lots of different ways. So creative placemaking, partnerships, civic engagement. We really want to use basically any lever we can pull to build that community piece and make it even stronger. So our time cannot be devoted to downtown Charleston or to Somerville or to Hollywood or to North Carolina or, California, that we have requests all the time. And so that's actually what initiated on our website. You'll find a whole tab called Free Resources. And those are projects that we've done in this community and the resources that we've used, from how to build an artist-led bus stop to how to host a better community meeting, to, there's a whole, I think there's maybe a couple of dozen packages under Free Resources for any community leader, any passionate citizen, any organization, anywhere, to just click on our links and to dig deeper into any particular project they've seen us accomplish. We want to give a very basic, very simple blueprint for how people can do that on their own. I think that's a really important piece. It's hard to scale community connections, but it's easy to share the blueprints for how we did some of our more successful projects. So for anyone who's watching this, I definitely recommend going to the Free Resources, and you'll see a lot of our smaller successful projects there. And we've created a blueprint for you to from start to finish, implement them in your own town or city. So that's there.
That's it. I mean, but when I say that you're creating a model for other people to use, just what you're doing and documenting what you're doing, that's plenty. But it takes that vision, and it takes that heartfelt community feeling. So what was it that made you start Enough Pie? Was it a series of decisions? Was it one defining moment? Because I've had both when I interview people, but usually for them, there's one defining moment. There is a switch that gets thrown all of a sudden. So what was it for you?
Well, I think for me, it was just how inspired I was by how many good ideas there were in this community. You know, I never had any intention of starting a nonprofit. I actually already have a day job and 3 kids, and life is busy. We all know that. So I didn't, the last thing this, city needed was probably another nonprofit. But it was created with the explicit purpose of, wow, there are so many thoughtful, creative problem solvers in our community. We've got to find a way to get their voices to the table and their actions to the, the ground level, and their warm bodies to the streets, so that we can activate this. So, if nothing else, it was just that I was blown away by the personal investment that so many community members in the Upper Peninsula have to this very special place, and to create a way for that to be channeled in a way that really could prompt some change and some hard conversations, and really inspire more connectivity. So, it was a big aha moment, but that aha moment came from me spending time with a lot of stakeholders and really recognizing the power that was just almost latent in the community that really needed to come out. So I think we've been able to accomplish that in the past, 7, 8 years, which has been great.
It took 7 or 8 years, but Enough Pie has been around for 15 months. Is that what you said in your?
No, we launched in at the end of 2011.
Oh, okay.
Conversations sort of started before then about sort of what was going on in the area, and so we've really been sort of fully working towards our mission since early 2012. And a part of that is really building trust. So I would say the early years are really about just doing the work and keeping your head down and making connections with the people, the leaders, the organizations, the stakeholders in the community that have been there way longer than I have, right? So really building trust. And then I think around year 3 or 4, we really started hitting our stride, and people wanted to partner with us. From the city, from all different departments inside the city of Charleston, to neighborhood associations, to other nonprofits in the area. It felt great to know that we had become that community arts organization. When people knew there was a creative way to solve a problem or a creative component to a project they wanted to do, it felt great that we started to become that first phone call of, hey, we want to put up a mural, or hey, we want to turn this, sort of vacant lot by this church into a butterfly book nook garden, or, hey, we think we should make crosswalks safer. Let's paint some crosswalks. So it really, this collaborative spirit really began to build some momentum once, we had put in our time and had invested in the community long enough for people to recognize that we focus on the process of the project just as much as the project by bringing all the stakeholders together. But we also are dedicated to strong execution. We want the murals to be beautiful. We want the butterfly book nook to be used and to be a central part of the community, and to feel safe and beautiful. So it's been a combination of a lot of work over 5 years to get to where we are today. And that includes, the incredible staff we have built, the board we have gathered. There's so many people that are involved in making Enough Pie, the success it's become. So,
but it takes the vision person, and that's what I try to tell people. It takes that one person to make that decision. And then from there, everybody can join in, but it takes somebody to have a vision for it. Has your vision changed since it's up and running and powerful? Has a vision from the original changed much?
Yes, because in some ways we still are not so powerful when you consider the David and Goliath analogy or metaphor to a small community arts nonprofit attempting to limit the impact of development. At the end of the day, it's a market-based economy, and this is a very this part of town is growing at a rapid pace, and there's very little that we can do to fight that in and of itself. So there are definitely some days where I want to throw up my arms and just, think, well, if we can't put this whole thing in a special bubble, how is it ever really going to work? But then at the end of the day, I realized that the more neighbors feel committed to a place, and the more the new, younger neighbors are committed to the happiness and safety of the older, long-term neighbors, and that connection has been woven between everyone, then I think that can become a force all of its own. I really think, at the end of the day, how powerful is that? It remains to be seen, but I do find that there is real magic and meaning in building those connections and looking out for each other and speaking up, and empowering neighbors to speak up for themselves in terms of what they want to see in this development, and how they can partner with groups that want to come in. So it's, a collective voice can get to be pretty loud, but we still have a lot of work to do. So we'll see.
I think we need to redefine power. We're used to power walking around the suits, and that's what we see as power. But I don't think that's real power. That is kind of entrenched, sort of the status quo. But I think there's something new coming. And if you look at every sweeping change that's ever been anywhere, like Gandhi, and I think of Mandela and all of these people, it was one person. And then people started joining in. And to change a paradigm, that's what it takes, because the paradigm shift is not going to come from above.
Right.
And I think we're at a pivotal place in our country and in the world right now, and there are huge changes happening. So I think you're right on it. I mean, easy for me to say from the outside, right? But I think you're right on it, and I think that's what power is. It's making that shift in the culture. And so this is a very, very pointed way of doing it. So if I can invite you to kind of rethink power, and it's a lot of work. There's no question about it. It's not easy, because you're creating a whole new pathway.
For sure.
And that's what makes it so wonderful. So walk us through some of your events, and so we can see kind of how this operates when it is doing an event or a parade or something.
Sure. Well, the sort of annual plan that we've moved into, since the beginning of Enough Pie, we've always had an awakening event. And the very first year, it was an art installation inside of the building that eventually was developed as a place for nonprofits and artists and small businesses. But before the demolition began, but after it had sort of been cleaned out, we put out an open call for artists to come in and take over a room. And it was phenomenal to see how much artists adored getting out of the galleries, out of the studios, and going into this totally, before in Charleston, never really done before concept of, here, take this whole room and whatever you want to do it, So we had some incredible submissions. I think we ended up with about 30 artists that were everything from photographers to performance to installation to dance. it was really pretty powerful. And so that sort of created this awakening moment every year. And since then, we've done an awakening, for example, a couple of years ago, inspired by the history and importance of indigo in South Carolina. So we created something called a vat shack. And for a whole summer, the awakening sort of moved from beyond just a couple of days to a whole summer of programming in and about indigo, where community members could come and dye their own white cotton garments in these vats of indigo. And, on the surface, it sounds really simple and very creative, but there's something powerful about seeing young and old and black and white and brown hands all going into an indigo vat together. And you have to stand there and you have to hold your fabric for, a few minutes. So you start talking. So this incredible conversation happens very organically outside of an indigo vat. So that was one of our really spectacular ones. And, so every year we have this awakening moment where we are creatively coming together. And now it's kind of turned into creatively coming together to solve an issue that we think is really important to the Upper Peninsula and also probably Charleston as a whole. So a couple of years ago, we did a few months of an awakening all around sea level rise. Charleston is experiencing quite a bit of flooding in recent years, what we call sunny day flooding. So really addressing issues around flooding. Sometimes it's hard for people to talk about climate change in the state, but everyone can talk about flooding, especially in the area in which enough pie works. So everyone has their own story about not getting to school, not getting to the doctor, not feeling safe to leave their house, having trouble traveling the roads because of the flooding. So we brought together scientists and artists and educators and really dug in on how to educate and really involve people in helping to come up with some ideas for how to address this. We wrote a policy that we presented to City Council and the mayor, and that resulted in a full-time position for a resiliency officer. So Charleston, I wouldn't say that we're the reason there's a new focus on flooding, but we were part of that momentum that really pushed the conversation. The next year, our awakening was around mobility and being able to find equity in transportation and dignity in transportation. There isn't a very strong public transportation system in Charleston, and the bike lanes are woefully inadequate in many places. So it's a very car-centered city outside of downtown, where you have the sort of images of tourists and everybody walking around or in a horse and buggy. It's really quite difficult to navigate the city. So we worked with another nonprofit and many civic leaders to really try and address, in our part of the Charleston map, what solutions we might come up with to ease mobility and to talk about it in ways that really prompt change. This year, I'm really excited to say that we've taken awakening to a full year. We've realized there's so much that comes out of an awakening. We activate a steering committee that's always artists, community leaders, nonprofits, people that are really connected to the issue. And so we build that. We have sort of these ongoing meetings, these ongoing events. So it really kind of became something much larger than a day or a week or a summer or a couple of months. So now that is our full annual plan. This year we're focusing on awakening Weave the People. And that actually was inspired by a David Brooks article about weavers, a project he's doing at the Aspen Institute, where he focuses on the people, much like you, Diane, who at a very ground level are weaving the fabric of a community back together, and in really dynamic ways. And so we've decided to focus on that, because in so many ways we feel like that has always been our mission. So this year we want to inspire others to become weavers. We want to highlight many of the change agents that are also in the community, that are weavers in their own right, and find ways to support them more, and to help their ideas come through to fruition, and really sort of band together as this collective of weavers. So, I think a part of what's so important when you do community work is that you continuously meet over and over, and that there's opportunities to gather, whether it's around food or around art or around a committee meeting. So, that's one of the reasons this sort of awakening concept has turned into a full year, is because it's not just the event at the end. It's all of that emotional and physical and inspirational support that happens along the way from all these sort of committed people on whatever committee it is, that really invest the time and the energy to make it happen. So that process, we think there's magic in that process. So we've expanded it to be a year, and I'm excited about that recent sort of change and how our annual plan unfolds.
You hit on the whole thing, and this is, and I see it with everybody that I interview, and that is, if you look at what's going on politically in this country and all across the board, it's impacting every part of it. People are at loggerheads, and they're fighting, and people who normally probably wouldn't do that, and they're entrenched. And what you've discovered, and what some of the other folks that I've had the pleasure of interviewing have discovered, is that you go under. You
below the noise.
You attack them with art. You attack them with events. And I don't mean the word attack, but you know what I mean. But that's exactly the way, because it allows people to move out of their position and to be open. And this is, you're right on it. This is what has to happen across the board. This is huge. And that's why I said it's bigger than what you think. And I've said this to a lot of people, but this is the wave of the future. This is how it has to go, because it's the only way that's producing any kind of results or movement. So it's very, very, very powerful, and it's very meaningful. I also want to ask you, and it's interesting because I heard young and old a lot in your conversation. And for a lot of people, it's the youth that are stepping up. I think of Jamie Margolin that I interviewed. She's 17 years old, and she's doing the huge climate movement in September, and it's all over the world. And Greta Thunberg is coming here. And so what do you see about the youth, or is it different for the community that you're working with?
Well, I think I'm so inspired by the youth too. My oldest child, my daughter, is about to turn 13, and I'm so amazed at how they are so connected to causes and are paying attention. And that, that makes me hopeful. Although I did read a great quote by Greta, and she said, older people always come up to her and say, "Oh, you're giving me so much hope." And she says, "I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic." Some things you really need to get going on here, people. And so that's the energy that's coming up from the young people, which I think is really powerful. It's sort of like, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we think about it like this? Like, there's other things we can try. It's this almost the, I don't even think it has anything to do with being jaded, but it just has to do with thinking more creatively about solving problems. And so obviously that's a big part of our mission. So we find a lot of energy in young leaders and school children and the younger community that gets connected with Enough Pie. And I think in particular for communities that are experiencing so much change in terms of gentrification or displacement or affordability, is to try and find that next generation of leaders that wants to stay in the community, that can speak for the generations that have been there before, to capture that energy and to really find a way for them to plug in so that they feel committed to that particular spot on the earth, to that particular community, to that school, that church. And so, that in a lot of ways, I think is really, even beyond Enough Pie's mission, but I think one of the many strategies for building more connectivity is to really highlight and double down on the youth leadership. We need them. We need those folks to stay connected.
One of the things that it made me think as you were talking is that what Thunberg said about people, they've got to step up. People feel powerless. And one of the things I am watching and seeing, and that is comfort and having everything you need takes your power. It's when you have nothing and you have to find resources in yourself, that's when you connect to your power. And so there may be a way that we can learn to connect to the power without having to go through trials and tribulations, but that's what happens. And so people are feeling powerless. They're not lazy. They think there's nothing they can do because they've been told that.
Right, right.
So what you're doing is so wonderful and so important because you are helping people to find their power. And it's not about money. It's never about money. And it's not about position. It's what you have inside. And it's connecting to what you have inside that creates everything. So that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. It feels, it does no good to speak on someone's behalf, right? You have to give them the tools to speak for themselves and to feel like they have that voice and they have that power. So hopefully, it's bringing people out and getting them engaged, getting them talking, creating support systems to elevate those voices. And because you're exactly right, there is so much power in each individual that I think, it's quite inspiring when you do see it come together collectively and create something that's becomes a real valuable testament to sort of community resourcefulness, right? People are always amazed at Enough Pie that we have, a staff of 3 and a tiny budget, and we do all that we do. And it's because our secret is that we embed this process inside of the community and with our partners. Like, we could never do this if these people didn't feel empowered to sort of rise up and help execute these great events. I think that is, at the end of the day, our best hope for moving forward is people feeling empowered to get involved in whatever form that may be, but that they do have value to their community. Yeah.
And it's creating a vision that other people can see, and then they can enhance it, and it grows and becomes much larger. But the vision keeper is important. Yeah. So do you have a different vision going forward this year?
I think that we have always tried to evolve with each event, with each success and failure. I have been on boards where it's a very rigid mission, and the annual plan doesn't change too much year to year. But being a youngish organization and focusing in an area of town which is under-resourced or maybe unknown, not quite as highlighted as the rest of Charleston. I like to think that we're nimble enough to kind of let the flow of what we're hearing and feeling shift us in ways that it's going to be more connected. So the vision is still there, right? The vision is this sort of creative problem solving of, as one of the artists we worked with many years ago said, artists can envision the world we want to live in. So like letting that sort of build, what is the community that we want to live in? So that changes from year to year. I think a big piece of when I look forward, it's paying attention to those nuances and kind of following the community and how they connect with our vision. How do they interpret that? And how can we better help them sort of execute that? So, it continues to evolve, but I do believe that, over time, each awakening, each event becomes so much bigger that it just keeps growing. I think that if any casual observer was to look at everything we've done, from poetry on shop windows to creative bus stops to Memorial Day slip and slides for the neighborhood kids, like they might think, to breaking bread, that's always a big piece, is this sort of breaking bread together and eating together. Like these things may seem small, but when you do these things, and when you gather these people over and over and over and over and over again, things change, and connections are formed. And so, going forward, I just want to continue to build on that and to continue to inspire, other, citizen artists, other committed community members, to dig in, because there is power in small acts, I think, of connectivity, small acts of kindness. So, to continue to roll those out and to find those connection points is really all I want to continue to do.
That's pretty good. And I'm going to invite you to redefine things. And what I want you to do is please take out the adjective small, because those are the powerful things. The human connection is the most powerful thing there is. And no matter what the culture has told us, and it tells us what is important, it is those interactions, it's those insights, it's those awakenings, if you will.
Yeah.
Those are the big things. And we've been trained to see those as small.
Right.
They're not. And I think one of the things that you are helping to do is redefine what works, what's powerful, what we need as a human culture. I mean, it's happening here in one section of Charleston, but this will have ripple effects in other places as well. So I think we are, as a human community, at a turning point. And things are changing, and they're changing rapidly. And so when the old guard kind of fades out, we need to have something to take its place. And that's what you're doing. You're one of many, thank God, who are doing that. So I invite you to take out the adjective small, if I may.
Yes. Thank you. Good suggestion. I agree.
So what is coming up next, for what event, or what is going on right now, if people can join in at Enough Pie?
Sure. We are just sort of kicking off in September the start of our Weave the People. And so we're very excited about this. It's going to be a year long. And there's, a year-long focus. So there'll be multiple points for connection. The steering committee is just getting started. The events are so varied and so rich, with community input, from murals under the overpass, to bringing back to life an old basketball court that's laid sort of vacant and in disrepair for a while. We're really trying to, this is a part of the city that has been intersected by highways and roads and trains all its life. Like, it's just sort of a cross through part of town. And so that physical, sort of, the dead end streets and the overpass, like those physical obstacles to connection, are just as powerful as the more invisible objects to, or invisible obstacles to connection. So we're kind of using both of those strategies over the course of this year. So, and another way people can get involved is we really want to have people nominate who they believe are weavers in the community. So who's another change agent, who has a vision for something, and maybe they're doing it quietly, maybe they're doing it only in their church, or only with the 5th grade class, or only on their block. Is this an idea? Is this a weaver that we should really throw some attention to and highlight in hopes that their great idea can benefit the rest of the community? So that's really an open call we're excited about. So we want to partner with the weavers that are already embedded in the community throughout this year.
That's so wonderful and so exciting. And so when people want to find out about this, they go to www.enoughpie.org.
That's correct. Yep.
And you have a Facebook page?
We have a Facebook page. We have Twitter. We have Instagram. There's lots of ways to connect with us via the website or any of those. Definitely would love for people to check out our events, our mission. As I mentioned earlier, the free resources page is great for people that are, hear this interview and live in, Oklahoma or Alaska. If you want to run a successful meeting or want a bus stop down the street, there's great resources for how we were able to implement those ideas in our small community. So we definitely want to share as much as we can. So encourage people to check out our website for sure, for events and ways to get involved, and also ideas that they can take back to their community.
What would you say to somebody who's sitting someplace looking at their city and wanting to do something? What would you say to them?
I would say that I think that we don't need to rely on the experts anymore. I think everyone is an expert in where they live. Everyone is an expert in the community in which they live, and they better than anyone know what needs to happen. Sometimes what they lack are the resources for affecting that change. But I always think about Jane Jacobs in New York and how she was just simply paying attention to her neighborhood and really knew that, an interstate coming through there or crisscrossing her area would break down the beautiful connections that happen when people can be street level together. She wasn't an expert, but now she's become this glorified, she's like the patron saint of urban planning now. So everyone has a great deep knowledge, I think, about the place in which they live. So I think it's just trying to connect with the organization or the neighbor, or this perhaps even a city department that can really help that idea or that problem come to a resolution. Because I always feel like if one person is thinking something, there's probably a handful of other people that feel the same in that one small community. So sometimes it just takes somebody being bold enough to stand up and say, let's do this. Who's with me? And I think there's quite a lot of support for that. As you have mentioned, that's where the power is coming from these days. So I would definitely say to people, don't wait for the experts. You're the expert. So yeah, find a way.
That was a very powerful statement, which I knew you were going to give. So. Thank you so much. This was such a delight. I'm sure we will connect again. And
I hope so.
This is so wonderful. So thank you, Kate, founder of Enough Pie, for being on Transformations and for inspiring our listeners. And you've demonstrated, once again, one person, one decision, one commitment. You got a world changer. And thank you to our audience for joining us on Transformations, interviewing people, changing our world. This is your host, Diane J. Shaver, saying, remember, one person. And I hope one day I'll be interviewing you. And please see the other World Changer interviews on www.transformationspodcast.com. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you have to do it under my name. And it's all caps or you won't get there. So it's DIANNESHAVER, and you will be able to see all the interviews there. You can find us on Instagram, and we have a Facebook page, Transformations, interviewing people changing our world. And so until next time, one person, one decision, one commitment, you got a world changer. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again. Hey, Kay. Thank you so much. At some point,
Thank you.
I have a project. We're off here. I have a project that I want to talk to you about when you have, a moment. So,
Okay.